When you check into a hotel and you present your ID, do you ever think that you're giving away far more personal information than necessary? The hotel only wants to prove your identity, but now they also know your age, weight, home address, driver's license number, and more. As soon as you hand it over, you lose control. We're often asked to give away too much of our private data. Once it's out of your hands, that information can become susceptible to hacking, the sale of your personal data, or a barrage of unwanted ads. But what if there was an option to verify your personal information without giving away unnecessary, critical, private details? Verifiable credentials, a pillar of Web 5, solves this. There are digital certificates of claims that are easily shared in a private and secure way. They can prove your legal name, age, ownership of an asset, or anything really. Verifiable credentials limit the amount of data you share to only what's required, and they can't be tampered with or faked. Let's reimagine how identification could work. With Web 5, the government issues a verifiable credential that proves your identity and lives in what we call an identity wallet. So now when you check into the hotel, you present the front desk with a verifiable credential and share only what the hotel needs. This establishes that you are who you say you are, without giving away more personal information than you'd like. Verifiable credentials make proving claims easier, more private, and more secure.
Happy Friday, y'all.
Hey,
Ebony. What's going on?
not much. I'm excited to be back. And I tried to make the space like a little cooler. You see the purple?
Yeah, I see you leveling up the scene.
I'm trying. I'm gonna add like more stuff in the back, but I feel like the color gave it a little
Yeah,
something.
it's giving it a pop. Also, how is I think last time when you first joined us, I don't know if you were like that was your first time going from community management to developer advocacy. How's it been so far for like the last couple of days? I mean, not last couple of days, maybe weeks, months. I can't keep track of time.
Honestly, it's insane because it's about to be 3 months and it doesn't even feel right. It doesn't even feel like it, but it's good. I want to actually write like a little blog post on it and share with everybody just like my experience transitioning from community manager and some of the skills that I'm taking with me into this role. So stay tuned for that. I'll be able to give a little bit more there. But no, like I'm excited. I'm happy to be working with you and learning from you. So it's
awesome. Great. Yeah, I'm happy to work with you too. It's been fun. A said, congratulations. All right. So y'all, if this is your first time tuning into this stream, I decided I'm changing the name. I'm calling it TBD TV. It could be corny, but I'm gonna let that.
No, I like it.
So if this is your first time, we basically stream every Friday with SSI experts, kind of just learning about this whole world of like SSI and global payments. Today, we actually have someone from TBD joining us. Usually we talk with people outside of TBD, but we have Nick, who is a compliance lead. Super excited about that. Hey Nick.
Hey guys.
Right. I feel like the really cool thing about working remote is even though we're on the same team, it still is kind of a little mystery to you that we don't even know that much about you. So I'm excited to like hear your introduction. Tell us about yourself. What inspired you to join TBD? Give us all the deets.
Yeah. So I work on the compliance side of the house at TBD and have a compliance background. What drew me to TBD was the idea that we could both improve compliance along with privacy at the same time, using this technology that underpins Web 5. decentralized identifiers and verifiable credentials. Nowadays, there's typically a trade-off between better compliance and better privacy. And I really wanted to move the needle on that. And that's what motivated me to join TBD, specifically on the compliance side of the house.
How did you find out about TBD? Did you just like stumble on it on like LinkedIn, or like how'd you hear about it?
Yeah, man, that's a good question. Before I joined TBD, I was working at Cash App. And what really drew me to Cash App was the opportunity to work on Bitcoin. And I think what drew me to TBD, if I remember at the time, is I read the white paper that was being passed around internally. And I think it had recently been published. And there were all these super unfamiliar terms that I'd never heard of before. DIDs, VCs, had no idea how any of that worked or what any of that meant. And so I decided, and there wasn't much material online about this stuff either, aside from really nitty gritty technical standards, which I wasn't about to dig through. And so I found a copy of this book called Self-Sovereign Identity, written by pretty much a messiah in this space called his name is Drummond Reed. And I read that book end to end, and that's what really got me excited about this technology and using it for compliance.
Nice. For me, I literally how did I hear about TBD? Oh, it was actually through Nick, another Nick that works at the company. He told me about TBD, but what drew me was TBDex and like that project that we're working on. So I'm excited to hear more about like the compliance and how that fuses together with TBDex and stuff.
Yeah, same. And before we, I loved hearing about the fact that you kind of came in here through Cash App. I feel like that happened with a lot of people. When I talk to them, they're like, "Oh yeah, I was already working in like the Block, Square, Cash App ecosystem." Before we dive even deeper into who you are and stuff like that, I am going to do like my little like conversation starter, just to get the conversation popping and relaxed and all that. So my question to y'all and the audience is, do you all prefer to sleep with like AC on and the fan and the window open and everything? Or are you the type of person that's like, yo, I need like 7 layers of covers on top of me? Because I feel like there's 2 extremes of people.
Nick, you go.
Okay, I'll go. Yeah. I really like having all the covers basically up to my nose. And what I really like is like, you need it to be kind of cold for that, obviously. But I really need the noise, like the white noise. And so I have this little meditation like device that spins a fan just for that noise. But yeah, that's sort of my little setup, I'd say. Plus, I would love a pregnancy pillow as well, even though obviously I don't need one.
At first, I thought you were just saying you would love a pregnancy. I was like, okay.
No, pregnancy pillows are the best. I gave birth to my son 2 years ago, and I still sleep with it. And my fiance tries to steal it all the time. They're literally the best. Like, love that pillow. Love it bad. But for me, I'm chronically cold. Like, I'm always cold. My family always asks me if I'm anemic, and I'm not. I'm just always cold. So I love covers literally up to the nose like you, but I don't want any fan. Like, I want to be sweating because I'm always cold. Like, I just want all the covers. I want the heat on, like 75. That's what I like. That's
y'all are my people. That's what I want too. I know some people, they're like, I gotta have the fan on, window open, AC blasting. I'm like, how could you sleep like that? But I like that Nick has like a sound thing. I need to do that because all I hear like outside my window is like turkeys gobbling. It's so like irritating. But yeah, awesome. Cool. Now we can dive in a little bit more. And so my question to you, right? So you said you like work in TBD compliance and stuff like that. I'm gonna ask a really dumb question. I don't really know what compliance is. Like, I have an idea. I'm like, okay, it means like following the rules, but like, do you want to tell us?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so there's a lot of rules for a lot of things. In the finance industry, there's a lot of rules around preventing and detecting financial crime, and that includes money laundering and terrorist financing. And so the way financial institutions need to do that is they have to identify their customers, number one. Number two, they have to understand what the customers are intending to do with the platform. So get a sense of like what their normal behavior is going to be. Um, and also get a sense of, is this person someone I shouldn't be doing business with? Like, is this person on a list of sanctions list, for example? Like the Treasury Department has said, you cannot do business with these people, otherwise we'll fine you a lot of money. Or are they a politically exposed person, which would open up the possibility of corrupt payments flowing through your platform? And after you get a sense of all that, get a sense of how they're going to use your services, you then have the obligation to perform ongoing monitoring. And if you find something that's sketchy, literally have a person manually review that activity and determine if it requires a report, a suspicious activity report, where you literally type up what you're seeing, what you think you're doing, and then send that off to the Treasury Department. And all of this is required by these regulations, and typically what a compliance function does in the payment space. There's additional stuff you have to do that's shaping up in the EU and whatnot as it relates to digital identity specifically. But specific for the financial use case, those are the rules at a high level that you have to follow.
I'm gonna go with...
Yeah, go ahead. Sounds cool. Help me.
It's funny.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Whenever I hear you say like money laundering or things like that, I automatically think of like a mafia movie and just like action and like all this crazy stuff happening. So I feel like there's like some kind of excitement in there and like what you're talking about. And then for me, when I think of compliance, I didn't realize that like compliance and legal, like that would be two separate teams. And that it's not like they're not just one. Like I would always lump it together in my mind, but then working here, I'm like, wait, there's a legal team and there's a compliance team. What would you say is like the big separation there? If you...
Yeah, it depends. A lot of compliance folks have a legal background because if you want to implement this stuff effectively, you have to understand the laws, of course. It just so happens that we have a really stellar legal team here at TBD. Who has also advised me to say this is not advice on this call, so I should say that.
On the screen.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, like the way we've sort of separated is they've been really instrumental in guiding us around exactly what those legal requirements are in building up our own program for the use cases we're building on top of TBDEX, those financial use cases. And making sure that all the requirements we're building towards, whether that be monitoring transactions, which parties to a transaction that we need to push through identity verification of some sort and like request a credential that represents that, making sure that all those requirements are accurate. That's something we've been working really closely with them on. And then when it comes to implementing all of that, operationalizing it, that's the part of it that we've really been driving, and how we sort of split up the work, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot.
Yeah.
I'm curious on the question that you had, Ebony, that you wrote down. Like, I wanted to say it.
This is kind of like a fun question. So you've given us like all the details on what compliance is and like what you do. But I don't know if you guys remember, like a few years ago, there was this thing going around where they were like, say you're at like, I don't know, like a family dinner, you haven't seen them in a long time, and they ask you, what do you do for work? And like one line or 5 words, how would you say what it is you do for work?
Yeah, this is something I've had to practice a lot actually, because obviously there's so many components to Web5 that you can go down the rabbit hole so fast, and then people are gonna want to leave dinner. So
like, this guy's crazy on their way out.
Yeah, but the way I like to explain it short and sweet is I'm working to enable private ways, really private and secure ways of people being able to access financial services using data that's fully under their control. That's sort of the elevator one pitch sentence of the focus I have at TBD on compliance.
I'm gonna like use that a little bit and tweak
Yeah.
it for myself because I'm like already explaining developer advocacy. People were like, "What? You're a software engineer? I don't even know what a software engineer does. Now you're doing talks. I don't know." And then I added in TBD stuff, and I know everyone at the dinner table is like, "I'm ready to go." So I'm gonna take that. I like that.
No, same. Whenever I get asked, like being at TBD, I'm like, and it's family. So family, I'm just like, I'll tell you later. We just never get back to it because I already know it's going to be the longest conversation. Then I'm going to have to show them stuff, which is fine because like I don't mind doing that. But it's just, I could never think of a sentence to like say it. So I love what you just said. I'm stealing that too. We actually have a question. Do we want to get into some questions now or do we want to?
I think we should, if you want, leave it for the other part, the Q&A part. Like, so I start them. So as they come in, like we could start them and then we'll like leave because I want to make sure like we do like all the amount of time possible for the Q&A.
Okay.
If that's cool. Cool. So another question I want to ask you is like, usually when I give a talk, like a conference talk about like anything regarding Web 5 or TB a lot of the people are like, oh, this sounds really cool, but I don't know if this is really feasible. Like, are governments going to say yes to this? And I'm always like, I don't really know exactly how to answer them. So I'm curious from you because you would know that best. Like, how would you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing I find to make this technology really viable for adoption is that it actually works very well in government's favor. Governments really want a way of enabling services to very securely and privately identify people, for example. And VC's verifiable credentials offer a really promising solution to that. You know, one set of rules that we're seeing pop up a lot lately are age restrictions on accessing pornography on the internet. These are popping up all over the place in various states, and the challenge with implementing those regulations is that no citizen, of course, wants to upload their ID to these sites along with their PII. And they also don't want to connect some sort of service that knows their identity and can see what service they're trying to access by doing that. So for example, using your bank account to attest to your identity, your bank could know where you're using that information if you're not using something like a verifiable credential in the middle. And so all that being said, the way I see it is this technology is an enabler for governments to implement more privacy respecting regulations that protect their citizens and also give their citizens the power to use their data how they see fit. And so I think it's a really good bet for governments. We're seeing really strong adoption across a lot of states with mobile driver's license, using various ways of implementing, but in essence, it's a verifiable credential. And we're also seeing a ton of adoption from governments in the EU. And Web 5 is building on all these primitives. And so I'm pretty optimistic about adoption. It really, to me, it aligns with their desires here. So
That was a really interesting example you just gave of like the pornography example. Cause you're right. Like, who's gonna want to be like, this is my ID, or like log in with Google?
And just stamps and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
for sure, you wouldn't want your bank knowing every time you access these sites,
Yeah.
and then potentially factoring that into their decisions around credit issuance, et cetera. That would be horrendous. So the way I see it, this is a really good enabler to move away from that world. So
yeah, that makes sense. And I saw that like the way mobile driver's license are made and stuff like that, they use verifiable credentials behind the scenes and stuff like that. So it does seem like what you're saying, like governments are looking for.
Happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, implementations are varying in the US on mobile driver's license. Different states are taking different approaches. There's sort of two dominant ways of doing this. One more so than the other. There's the ISO IMDOC standard mobile document, which uses a slightly different way of making the verifiable credential than the way some states are also exploring, which is using what I think is now at IETF, the verifiable credential model of expressing this information. And so what we're missing in the US, and I think we'll get towards, is a standard way for all the states to issue this in the same sort of package. Until we have that, it'll strain interop a bit, but I think we'll get there. And it's great seeing state by state adoption with these two different ways of doing things. So.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like it is really cool seeing it, and it makes me kind of like envious. Like, when's my state going to do that next? But you also touched base on a question that I was going to have. Like, if all the states are implementing it whenever they want and using different ways of implementing it, how's that going to work, like consecutively, like together? So you kind of touched base on that already. Another question I have, because like you said, in compliance and like just in this world, there's so many abbreviations for everything, and I feel like we often use terms like AML and KYC. Can you describe like what those terms mean for people that are unfamiliar with the space?
Yeah, so AML refers to anti-money laundering, and KYC refers to know your customer. I'll start with KYC since that's typically the first process that's performed. So KYC typically involves verifying the identity of a customer, which often occurs remotely nowadays, whereby all of us have gone through this. You upload your PII along with the selfie. Nowadays, with deep fakes being more prevalent, you also have to do movements alongside that selfie, which is assessing your liveness based on the prompts, because they're trying to prevent against like either a static deep fake or a real-time generated deep fake being injected into that process. They need controls against that. And then comparing that information against the document you upload and potentially comparing it against authoritative databases as well, such as like databases run by DMVs, or maybe databases collecting a bunch of information from the credit agencies. And if everything matches up well and their algorithms say you look good, they have pretty good confidence you are who you say you are. And then that's the point when they try to assess how you're actually going to interact with the platform and understand, are you a sanctioned individual? Are you a politically exposed person, et cetera? Following that, you get to the anti-money laundering stage where you're looking at their continually evaluating transactions to understand, are these sort of fitting behaviors that look sketchy? And alerting those transactions for review if they are, and then reporting it if need be. And so those are the two terms in a nutshell, and how they tie into compliance as a whole, particularly in the digital identity space. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, no, that was a good explanation. And I actually recently dealt with that when it came to the KYC, when I was logging into the IRS, because I wanted to check when I was going to get my tax return. And I had to go through the whole process of like basically identifying myself, doing my social, and then doing the video and all of that. And I was like, oh, this is so much work. Just let me log in and see when I'm getting my money. But no, it makes sense with the way deep fakes are going. And that whole area is scary to me with like how realistic it's getting. And yeah, that's a whole nother topic, but that's a lot. But no, that was really, really good explanation. Thank you. And I hope it was good for everybody in the audience too. I feel like I actually really learned more about what AML was. I didn't know it was anti-money laundering. So thank you for telling me. I was like, what is that one?
I agree with you, Ebony. I liked how he described the movement portion, because I was always like, why do we need to do that part? But like, just put your face. But interesting that like it avoids the whole deep fake thing.
Yeah, well, it's a cat and mouse game, right? Like,
Mm.
and these vendors are constantly asking themselves, what is like the cost of attacking the system, and like what sort of barriers do we need to implement into that system to make the cost high enough to prevent bad behavior, and so that's getting harder and harder with deepfakes being more accessible to create, um, and easier to inject into that process. And this is actually like a critical thing for digital identity as well, because um, in order to get something like a mobile driver's license, a lot of people aren't going to want to walk into a DMV to do that. They're going to want to remotely verify with the DMV in order to get that credential, and that's going to require a process like this and controls around um, deepfakes being injected as a part of the application. And so, yeah, that's sort of a critical part of all this, and something we're going to need really strong controls around for this to work. So.
That makes sense. So you're right. If I got a mobile driver's license, I'm like, can I do it at home? All right. So we're gonna pause really quickly for, I would say, a word from our sponsors, TBD.
I like that.
Just a short clip of one of our past streams. So it'll be 55 seconds.
What does it mean to not have a central authority?
Hold on. I thought it would take us off. I'll take us off very quickly.
What does it mean to not have a central authority about who you are and what things about you are true? How do we use cryptography to our advantage to say that, hey, Chase can assert some things about me. My Robinhood account can assert some things about me. My other membership here can assert some things about me. I've got control and visibility over where that data is being shared and used and how. And then I can use some or all of it or none of it or proofs of it at that next thing that I need to sign up for or sign into. When you boil it down to that, then the talks around how to make this work for like the way the average person in the street is doing their finances becomes much easier to message, to share, to sell, to convey, and to raise money for.
Cool. I don't know. I really thought it was gonna cover us all, like how the other video did, but it didn't.
Yeah.
But that's all right. Just trying out things. All right. So my last question before we jump into the Q&A, which Ebony will lead, is, all right. So since we have tools like Web5 and TBDex that are open source, like anyone can contribute to it, but we still have to stay compliant to certain like rules and regulations. Like how do we make sure we still are following those rules while we're just saying like, hey, anyone can contribute to this if we wanted to, or if they wanted to?
Yeah, good question. And Nick Moore in the chat had a similar question, like, is Web5 an open standard that anyone can implement? The answer is yes. It's open source. You can fork it, do whatever you want with it. And so there's nothing we can do to stop people from doing whatever they want with this technology. It's an open protocol. They can do whatever they want. The use cases that we enable, though, that's a different story. We have regulatory obligations that we need to abide by in our implementations, and how we're making use of that needs to support those regulations. And so what that means is, we're looking at some financial service use cases right now that have regulations around them that require performing KYC on customers. And so what that very tangibly means for us is we need a standard and secure ways for financial institutions on this network to be able to prompt their existing IDD flows. And as a part of that process, perhaps accept verifiable credentials in lieu of that manual form, if the trust is there. But after that process has been completed, issue a verifiable credential representing successful completion of KYC. That way we can fulfill those regulatory requirements for the use cases we're building on top of TBDex. And then on top of that, as regulations shape up in the US eventually, but currently like in the EU, we're working to make sure that we're interoperable with a lot of those requirements, and pushing towards that, because they're in the EU, they're sort of setting the standard for what the security requirements are going to look like, the requirements for the protocols that are used, et cetera. And so we're trying to stay on top of that, by making sure that all the stuff that we publish is meeting those regulations, and all the stuff that we put out for the community, therefore, the use cases they build on top can meet those regulations as well, with a bit more work on their end, but we're setting them up for success, hopefully, with these tools. So yeah, that's sort of how we stay on top of it, I would say.
Yeah, and I think another thing I want to add too is the type of license we have for our open source project. I think with MIT license, like anybody can do anything, like it's kind of like free for all, but we have like Apache 2.0, which I know I don't know all the details, but I know it's a little bit more stricter, where it's like we may have like trademark or patent rights and stuff like that. But those were lots of good points that you also brought up. Any thoughts or anything, Ebony?
No, yeah, I agree, because I also, when I saw that question, I thought it was a good question as well, because it does make you wonder, like, so once it's out of our control, like once they fork it, then it's kind of like up to them to maintain that they're within like legal params and stuff like that. But I was also curious, well, how does that work? Do we still have a little bit of liability there because it started from like the code that we're putting out there? But that was like cool to see like the difference. And then also, I guess it's our open source licensing that also plays a part in how that works as well. So no, that was a really good explanation. Thank you, Nick. Let's get into some questions. For some reason, Rizel, I can't pin the question. So if you want to just tap on them. Yeah, let's do this one. So for Nick, how does DID work in worlds of B2B, including screening UBOs, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, great question. There's actually a couple entities that are looking into this and doing a really good job about it. One of them is called the Global Legal Entity Identifier Foundation. And what they do is they have this process in place whereby business owners can go through IDV and submit evidence substantiating that they truly are the owners of a business, get a legal entity identifier for that business, along with a set of verifiable credentials that can be held and used to attest to the fact that you are a UBO of that business. And so, yeah, that's one way that's definitely gaining a lot of traction right now, in terms of using decentralized identity, that sort of technology stack as a whole, to enable this. The credential would contain all of the information about the business, the position of that person in the business, along with their personally identifiable information. And then it would be attached to a decentralized identifier where the UBO, that person, controls the keys for, and therefore can present the credential in a way where it can be verified by anyone, essentially. And so, yeah, hopefully that answers your question. Obviously, that ties into B2B use cases where you need to verify the UBOs, perform compliance processes on top of the PII, et cetera. So.
Thank you, Nick. That was a really good answer. I didn't know anything about LEI registration. I just like looked it up. So that was really cool. And hopefully it answered your question. If it didn't, feel free to have a follow-up question. Let's see. Next one. Oh, so Gerald said that he helped build those twos for the IRS through ID.me. So I'm going to find you and yell at you later, because that was the most annoying process ever. Let's go on to the next question, Rizel, from Dan. This is a long one. I'm going to pin it. It says, for states where VCs are not yet issued, do you know if U.S. compliance could be enabled by an independent organization/company acting as a proxy issuer to represent a physical credential as a VC issued by them? Let's start there.
Yeah, I'm just finishing reading the question too. I issue a VC that asserts our company validated this user's physical driver's license to be issued by the state of New York and includes the name, DOB, etc., then the user holds that VC and can present it anywhere to complete KYC/AML. Yeah, I do think there's an opportunity there. We're seeing we're seeing IDV vendors implementing reusable IDV solutions right now. I'm not sure how many of them are using verifiable credentials to do this, but it certainly would be a suitable means for doing this from a technology perspective. In that you could then state like this person has been verified. If you need to check the status of that verification, because we're performing ongoing checks to ensure that's still the verified person, here's a endpoint you can call to get that status information. Certainly a viable option, in my opinion, before the states get up to speed on doing this.
So you mentioned that there's possibly a process happening where IDV is being reusable, but not with credentials. What's the other use case? How is that being done? Do you know?
Yeah, I would have to look under the hood to understand the technology. I think a lot of places are implementing this using essentially like a phone home type perspective, whereby the data is held on that IDV vendor servers.
Okay.
And when a user wants to permission access that data to someone else, they authorize the IDV vendor to share it. And that information is shared directly with the relying party. In this case, probably a financial institution, any app that needs it. With VCs, of course, you put the holder, the subject of that credential in the middle of the flow. And so what that does is it creates a better, more privacy respecting flow for the subject, but it comes with challenges around monetization. Because now that the issuer is no longer getting these pings to say, please share, please share, please share. And they built up these revenue models around monetizing every time something is shared. It creates the question of how do I actually sustain a viable business model off of this? We're exploring ways to do this that use status lists, for example, as a means of gating payments, along with some other approaches. But yeah, there's various ways, alternative ways to do this if you're not using credentials in the middle. So
that was a really good point. I never thought about the business aspect of it, how they're going to make money if we're putting everything in the control of the users and stuff. Pretty interesting. Okay, our next question is, what are the areas of need/opportunity that folks in the community can help support or contribute to in the compliance space, if any?
Yeah, so we actually just published, and I'm going to talk about this in another session, but we just published a set of guides for what we're calling the known customer credential. Some of those guides are geared towards compliance professionals, and some of them are more technical guides that are geared towards developers working with compliance professionals to implement. I'd say we'd love feedback on that to make sure it's actually meeting the needs of compliance programs. And so that's one very tangible way that we could get help on this work.
Yeah, that was a really good question. Next one, UBO. Are there any states doing it at a government level?
Yeah, for sure. The FinCEN, this approach isn't using VCs, but FinCEN is releasing a beneficial ownership database whereby you can ping that database to get UBO information. And business owners are required to submit their information to the database. I would have to look up the requirements to be more specific, but that's one government-led approach. It's not using VCs, and so there are some privacy questions there, but that is one approach that's taking shape, along with the Glyph approach that I recently described, which is using a form of verifiable credential to make this happen. And That approach has a lot of buy-in from the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. They are overseeing the development of this work. So there's a lot of government acceptance and buy-in for that work, for the glyph approach. So
Nice.
I feel like, sorry, I have a quick question. I feel like I heard you say UBO and you might have defined it and I forgot. What does it stand for? Because it sounds like everyone knows what it stands for. I'm like, wait, what is it?
yeah, I was thinking beneficial owner of a business. A business can have multiple owners. And so, but yeah, Tanya, correct me if you were meaning something else to that question.
Gotcha. It would be rewired. Oh, sorry to interrupt. Keep going.
No. That was a good question. There probably was somebody else that was thinking the exact same thing. What is a status list? I know you kind of mentioned it a little bit. I'm not sure if you want to get too into it, but
yeah, happy to. So what if you think about it? Let's imagine I'm giving you a credential, Tanya, that says you are Tanya. And I'm signing over that credential with a signature that makes it tamper-proof from here on out. That credential can then be shared at a later point, and someone can verify that the information hasn't been tampered with. But the problem is that information is relatively static. And so if, as a verifier, you need to understand, has the status of that verification changed? There needs to be a way for the issuer to publish that information for people to check against. And so a status list is essentially a super private way of enabling that. It's basically, if you think about an Excel spreadsheet, it's an Excel spreadsheet with a bunch of ones and zeros tied to credentials. And verifiers can check that spreadsheet and look for a very specific identifier and see, like, is this a 0 or a 1? Like, is it good status? Is it bad status? And the issuer that's maintaining that list doesn't know which credential the verifier is trying to understand the status about. And so the benefit there is that the verifier gets to understand, is this verification still legit? And then the subject of the credential gets really good privacy in that the issuer doesn't know everywhere you're using it. So hopefully I didn't butcher that for technical folks on the call. But yeah, and hopefully that was relatively clear.
I feel like that was a good explanation. What it made me want to know is, so by like, if they're good or bad, are we talking about like, has the credential been like revoked or expired? Like, is that what we're referring to?
Yeah, it depends what you're trying to communicate through status. And that's up to the issuer. Like for a credential that's representing KYC, someone could get a revoked credential because they're now sanctioned. And so there would be an expectation that that status list is updated really frequently. And that checks on that status list are performed by verifiers really frequently as well. But for something like a credential representing identity verification, what that status list is representing may be entirely different. So it depends on the context of the credential.
Nice. I like the security layer there, how the verifier doesn't actually know much about the person that they're, or the credential that they're checking on through the status list. I thought that was a pretty good add in there. Our last question was, okay, Nick, do you know if there will be opportunities for multiple wallet providers to offer EU consumers a choice of wallets under EIDAS 2/EUDI, or will it only be one official wallet per country that's offered to EU citizens? That's a good question.
Yeah, and admittedly, I'm not as close to these regulations because the use cases we're targeting aren't targeting the EU as a region quite yet. So forgive me here. But the way I understand it, they've published a what they call the ARF, the Architectural Review Framework for their wallet. That includes a list of specifications that wallets need to have in place in order to meet the expectations of these regulations. And so the intent there, as I understand it, is for there to be a multi-wallet world where it isn't just a couple big players housing all of these credentials for EU citizens. Instead, there's a clear set of open standards that any companies looking to provide wallet services to consumers can implement, and actually have that be a check-marked, a pre-approved, whitelisted option that where consumers can store these credentials into. So the short answer is, I think so. Yes.
Cool. And wait, I know we. Oh, go ahead, Ebony.
No, go. I was gonna say, well said. The short answer.
I think for how much did we answer, Nick? I think we mentioned that it's not it's an open source thing that anyone can use. But did we like explain what Web 5 was, or because I could have forgotten?
Maybe not, but yeah, Web 5 is an open standard that anyone can implement. We have a set of SDKs we've published. They're fully open source. You can build whatever you want on top of it. The way I see Web 5 is it's an amalgamation of a bunch of different standards. Some related to DID, some related to VCs, some related to something novel called decentralized web nodes, which allow you to store a vast amount of your personal data and hold the keys to it. And so, yeah, I don't know if you guys would add some color to the Web 5 explanation there. But yeah, to answer your question, the answer is yes to that question. So.
Okay, cool. I might have made you repeat yourself. I don't know, Ebony, if you had more you wanted to say.
No, you're good. We actually didn't go over it, so that was a good catch.
Yeah.
I wish I could add links. I would have added a few links in here. But
yeah, we can add some like while we do more questions too, if you wanted. Yeah, and like to add on to it, maybe from like a developer perspective, I kind of describe it similar to how Nick says it, or I would also say like it enables you to build decentralized it's like an ecosystem that enables you to build decentralized applications. But one of the biggest differences is we're not using blockchain, we're using what Nick described, the decentralized web nodes. Cool.
Yeah, and I think the real power that comes from that is, especially in the financial services sector, is once you give the data to consumers and really properly put it fully in their control to use however they see fit, you open up a much more competitive marketplace for use of this data for financial services. And that's where I think TBDEX as a protocol will really shine, because at the protocol layer, it's creating the infrastructure needed for that greater level of competition. And so that's what excites me, I would say, about all of this.
Good stuff. Am I muted? No. Okay, we actually have one follow-up question. Remind me, what was SEC overseeing? And then we can add a link.
Yeah. Let me get you the specific. So the what I understand is there's a entity within the SEC called the Regulatory Oversight Committee, and they've been monitoring the work of GLIFE, the Global Legal Entity Identifier Foundation, that is working on turning the traditional legal entity identifier into what they call the verifiable legal entity identifier, which is essentially a verifiable credential that says, I'm the CEO of XYZ business. And it has a whole set of required processes that go into place in order for those credentials to actually be issued. And so, yeah, I actually can't comment in the chat.
You could put it in the private chat if you see the private chat, and then me or Ebony could put it in the comments.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I'll shoot you a link here. And there's other entities working on doing similar stuff here, using slightly different technical standards. But in short, they're doing it in a way that's using a verifiable credential, which can come in a lot of different flavors. So I just sent the chat or the link in the private chat.
Just put it. I was way ahead of you. All right, cool. So Thanks. That was a really good Q&A segment, y'all. I feel like we learned a lot, and y'all asked good questions. I'm going to quickly do the Web 5 tip of the day, and thanks y'all for being patient with me as I've been trying to share stuff or do these new segments. Like, I did not realize, like, I don't know if y'all saw when the Web 5 tip of the day like popped up real quick. I was like, oh. But I'm learning in public, and we're learning all together. Okay, really quickly, y'all. So today's Web 5 tip of the day is, did you know that in the Web 5 ecosystem, you can use an agent, often called a wallet, to manage your identities? The way it would work is you would generate your decentralized identifier and then make your DID portable using the export method. And then after that, you take that portable DID, import it into your user agent, and you can use both user agent and your DID to connect, or your identity, should say, to connect to Web 5. So that's just like a short little tip, but we can get back to some of the questions, or our last two questions. And the last question for you, Nick, is, what's one thing you wish more people understood about the importance of compliance in tech?
Oh man, that's a tough question. Sorry, I'm giving it a proper thought.
Yeah, no, take your time to think. We are not in a rush.
Yeah, I think the common message here is that these requirements are truly detecting and preventing some bad stuff. Like, of course, that's going to be the case. I do think there's some rightful critique, though, about taking such a broad swath approach of monitoring a lot of people's activity to get those benefits. And so I would say what's really important as we think through applying digital identity to this space is making sure we're taking a really thoughtful approach around respecting privacy of consumers, and ensuring that they are in optimal control of this data, and can securely use this data as well, because that's going to be a really important thing to solve. Once you actually own this data, it becomes paramount that you have a really strong way of securing it, and people can't just use this data when you don't want them to. And so, yeah, compliance is important, but getting it right with digital ID is going to be even more important. So yeah, that's that. I suppose that'd be my final message.
Ebony, I seen you go off mute. You seemed like you was gonna say something.
No. Take it away. I wasn't gonna say anything.
Oh, awesome. Well, all I was gonna say is, I guess we could wrap up. The only thing I wanted to let people know is, on May 2nd, there is going to be a show and tell with Nick. I can't quite remember the time. Do you remember it, Nick? If not, it's okay. Yeah. But basically, I'll keep talking, but be on the lookout on May 2nd for basically a show and tell in Discord about KYC credentials. So this was kind of like, I will say, a teaser to what's to come. So you can learn more about KYC credentials and all the other stuff that have to do with compliance that I'm still learning about myself. Thank you so much. Oh, and Ebony just told me it's at 1:15 p.m. So I believe we will have more streams coming up. I might not necessarily be doing them, but definitely be on the lookout. Follow us on social media to see what other streams we have coming up for the rest of the month. My next one will be in May 2nd, where we'll talk to RideFair, who basically used Web 5 to kind of create like a POC rideshare kind of concept, which I think is cool. Yeah. And I want to thank Ebony and Nick for like great commentary, great answers to questions. I really feel like y'all brought color, and also thanks to the audience as well for like the engaging questions. Anything you wanted to say, Ebony?
Agreed. No, just thank you. Thank you, Nick, for giving us more insight into compliance and how that fuses with the tech world and TBDEX and Web 5 and what we're building. So that was really great. And then obviously to the audience, amazing questions like always. So thank you. Thank you guys. It feels weird not ending with a fun question.
You think I should still do it? Okay, I'll ask Nick.
Something.
Yeah. I was like, let me take them out. Nobody be listening to Beyonce.
Do it.
Nick, we're not ready, but
one.
I'm gonna ask you 2 of them. One, what's your favorite food? And then after that, I'll give you a heads up. What's your favorite Beyonce song? So, what's your favorite food?
Oh man, favorite food probably breakfast tacos. Favorite Beyonce song. Man, I can't narrow down one song, but I would just say the whole Lemonade album is like incredible.
Lemonade was a good album. Thank
Yeah.
you. I thought you were gonna say Single Ladies. I was like, that's like I was like, everybody says Single Ladies.
No, you gotta watch the whole video album. It's a masterpiece. So.
It was. And Gerald said, "Oh, this is so sweet." He said, "Thank you, Nick, Rizel, Ebony, and the rest of the TBD team for hosting a great discussion session.
Aww.
Much respect and appreciation for your work." Thank you so much for your
you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
right.
Thank you, Gerald.
Thank you.
All right.
Y'all.
Let y'all go. Bye. Have a great Friday.
You guys.